Hello and welcome to A Tactical History of Liverpool. Since the victory over West Ham in episode 24, Liverpool had endured some mixed results. They drew away to Leeds United, with Tommy Lawrence both conceding and saving a penalty. They then followed it up by beating Vitória Setúbal in the Intercities Fairs Cup. However, despite this win, they exited the competition, falling victim for the first time to the away goals rule, which had been introduced a few seasons prior.
We managed to get two back, and then near the end I got what we thought was the winning goal, but that was the score at the final whistle, and everyone was waiting for extra time or hanging around not knowing what to do. And in fact they'd won on away goals, but we were unaware of the situation and the crowd were unaware, so there had to be an announcement before the crowd would leave. But we thought they would play extra time or before they actually the away goals came into operation. But there was no extra time. So we beat them 3-2, but lost the tie.
3 days later, they lost to Arsenal, Jimmy Robertson's goal ending their unbeaten record at Anfield. But they then followed it up by beating league leaders Everton 3-0 in the Merseyside derby, the scene of Sandy Brown's famous own goal. Still sitting in third place, next up Liverpool were due to host Manchester United. The last time we met United in episode 20, they were on their way to becoming the first English club to win the European Cup. Following this crowning glory, Matt Busby would state, "I am the happiest man in England tonight. This is not the end of the road for me. There's been a lot of talk about this, but I'm staying where I am until people get fed up of me, or they think I've got beyond it." Less than 8 months later, with United sat in 16th place in the league, Busby announced he would be retiring from his coaching duties at the end of the season.
The chairman and directors have tried to persuade him to carry on, and it was only with great reluctance that his request has been accepted.
When I go over 23 years of strife, strain, it's a long time. And after all, again, when you get to my age, 58 passing, it's time, I feel, for a young team manager to come in and deal with the problems of team selections and all things appertaining to the club.
Ever since the tragedy of Munich, the aim for United had been to win the European Cup. Now that had been achieved, what was there left? You could almost hear the energy and ambition sighing out of the club, said George Best. Everyone was talking as if the good old days were over. United's European Cup win had been a grand finale, rather than ushering in a new era of glory, and the next season they dropped into the lower half of the table, even flirting with relegation into a push in the spring. Busby was just 59 when he resigned from his role, but he had spent more than 2 decades in charge of United, forced into rebuilding the club multiple times. It was always a demanding task, he said, but Manchester United had become not just a football club, it had become a world-famous organisation, and the demands had grown every year from the start until it reached far beyond the power, the energy, or the capacity of one man to do. I could hardly see over the top of a pile of correspondence on my desk every morning.
The public, people don't ever realise what a manager suffers in one league match. A manager is living, and every match is a dread.
Not only that, but the injuries Busby had suffered at Munich meant he could no longer join in with training as he had with his previous sides. I decided, entirely of my own volition, to hand over the playing side to a younger man, he recalled. Busby wouldn't be retiring fully though. Instead, he moved upstairs into a general manager role, with reserves coach Wilf McGuinness taking over as chief coach of the first team. An England schoolboy captain, local lad McGuinness had been a highly sought-after young player, but opted to join boyhood club United. One of the Busby babes, he made his debut for the club in October 1955 and really began to break through into the first team the following season. Although he struggled for games in 57-58 with Duncan Edwards ahead of him at left half, he had been expected to travel to Belgrade for United's European Cup quarter-final, even handing in his passport to the club, only to twist his knee in a reserves game on the Saturday. The next morning he was diagnosed with torn cartilage, ruling him out just a day before he was due to travel. Whatever disappointment McGuinness may have felt at the time, this injury likely saved his life, although it would provide him little relief as he lost so many of his teammates and friends to the Munich air disaster.
Duncan Edwards and Eddie Coleman were two of the greatest wing halves you could ever hope for. Great, and I was a wing half. I never got in. I managed to play for England afterwards, but really, they were the players. You know, the lads who died. They made Manchester United.
In the wake of the tragedy, McGuinness rushed himself back from injury, playing again after only 5 weeks. Despite his desperation to do his part, his knee would swell up after each match, and so he wasn't deemed fit enough to make United's FA Cup final team. Nevertheless, he would return the following season, playing well enough to earn an England call-up. After the best season of his career would come his worst. United started the season horribly, and as we entered the autumn, McGuinness began to feel excruciating pain around his right shin. With nothing showing up in x-rays, McGuinness played on, receiving injections to numb the pain, but was unable to do so to the best of his abilities and soon found himself dropped. 20 minutes into a reserves game against Stoke in December, McGuinness went into a routine tackle and heard a loud crack. Both his tibia and fibia were broken. The searing pain in the build-up had likely been a stress fracture, but he continued to play, and so faced a much worse injury. McGuinness's break was a particularly bad one, with the edges of the fractures overlapping. Over a year later, after needing a bone graft from his hip to strengthen his leg, the cast came off and one leg was an inch shorter than the other. Unable to regain fitness despite his best efforts, McGuinness's playing career was over at the age of 23, engaged to be married but staring unemployment in the face with his living torn away from him. Fortunately for him, Bill Inglis, the assistant to trainer Jack Crompton, was set to retire, opening up a spot on the coaching staff for McGuinness to step into. A determined McGuinness took advantage, learning from his more experienced peers while bringing new ideas to the table, impressing enough to work with Alf Ramsey's England squad too. Now, nearly a decade later, it was Busby moving upstairs, leaving another role open. Jock Stein and Don Revie had been linked to the job, however they likely would have brought in their own staff, displacing those who would remain loyal to Busby throughout his tenure. Instead, McGuinness was promoted. United's new setup was akin to the sporting director head coach one comment today, but in an era when it was largely unheard of, and so the lines dividing up the duties were blurred.
He said, Wilf, I want you to be the team manager. I'm moving upstairs. You're in charge of all the team affairs, the training, the coaching, the picking of the team. And he said, I'm here to help. And that's how it was. Unfortunately, that was a grey area then. I didn't know how much he wanted to do and how much I didn't. And in the end, to the players, they still called him boss.
There is a certain irony to Busby introducing this setup for McGuinness, as Busby had only taken the manager's job all those years ago on the grounds that he would have full control. I was unequivocal about it, he recalled. I would accept the managership of Manchester United only if they would let me have all my own way. As the manager I would want to manage, I would be the boss. It was a major advantage for Busby in an era when the majority of his peers operated at the whims of their directors. Despite Busby's insistence on its importance for a manager, this control was denied to McGuinness. The idea was apparently to avoid overloading McGuinness with pressure early on. He was just 31 years old when he took over, and although he had nearly a decade's experience of coaching under Busby, he had never been the main man at any club, never mind one the size of Manchester United. I would be responsible for fitness and tactics, and I would pick the team, he said. Meanwhile, Matt would remain in charge of discipline, transfers and wages, and continue as the club's spokesman. In the wake of a disappointing season, United were entering a new era, while still trying to maintain continuity with what had made them so successful previously. It didn't start well. United failed to win any of their first 6 matches, and although the signing of Ian Ure gave them a boost, they lost another 4 before they travelled to Anfield for today's game, including a 4-0 thrashing in the Manchester derby. This left them sitting in 10th place heading into the game. With the benefit of hindsight, McGuinness admits he was a little naive, making rash decisions such as dropping half his team, including stars Dennis Law and Bobby Charlton after a defeat to Everton, only to lose the return 3-0. He also suggests he should have made better use of the experience of Jimmy Murphy and Matt Busby, who was reluctant to interfere. Maybe he was waiting for me to come to him, but the opposite was true too, said McGuinness. I didn't want to run to him with my first problem. Busby suggested McGuinness was a little immature. Given he was younger than some of his players and close personal friends with others, it was hardly surprising that he might struggle to maintain the right distance and gain the respect as boss. One story has him throwing playing cards at Willie Morgan after losing a hand of poker, which raises the question of whether a manager should be playing poker with his players at all. However, McGuinness wasn't the manager, he was the chief coach. Discipline was Busby's job. Busby may not have wanted to interfere, but the fact that he was still around the club and close to the players couldn't have helped McGuinness establish authority, with rumours of the players going to Busby behind McGuinness's back. Not everyone sadly would play for Wilf, said David Sadler. The side as a whole did not give 100% effort for him. It was as simple as that. The squad McGuinness had inherited from Busby wasn't exactly in rude health either. On paper, little had changed from a team that won the European Cup a year earlier, however it wasn't the same in practice. In the words of McGuinness, Bill Foulkes was doing the club a favour by playing at all. Now in his late 30s, he had wanted to retire after the European Cup win, only to be talked out of it by Busby, but was suffering with a knee injury that rendered him almost immobile. He should have been left to concentrate on his new coaching role, yet, as the youngsters who were supposed to replace him weren't of the required standard, he was forced into playing. Bobby Charlton, Paddy Carand and Shea Brennan had all entered their 30s too, and although Nobby Stiles and Law should have just been reaching their peaks, both had suffered debilitating injuries that ensured they would never be the same again. McGuinness's attempts to instill some tactical structure in the side also made him unpopular with George Best and Morgan, who were used to having freedom to do as they pleased under Busby. Best was just 23 and so should have had his best years ahead of him, but it was around this time that he really began to drink heavily. His worst behavioural excesses wouldn't come until after McGuinness, but he was already failing to turn up for training and going missing from the team hotel. McGuinness didn't think most of the youngsters of the club were of the necessary quality, and those he did, such as John Fitzpatrick and Francis Burns, had their development curtailed by injuries. United's long-standing physio Ted Dalton had died, replaced by men who were, like McGuinness, still learning their craft, and so the chief coach rarely had his strongest 11 available to him. McGuinness wanted to boost his squad with young players like Malcolm MacDonald, Colin Todd and Mick Mills. However, he wasn't in charge of transfers. The only player to join United during McGuinness's tenure was Ian Ure, who was about to turn 30. I wasn't sure he was the man to improve our side in the long term, said McGuinness, but Matt rated him highly. I respected his judgment and so I went along with him. McGuinness had endured a tough start to his new post, but for his trip to Liverpool he was able to field a strong side for once, with only Dennis Law and Nobby Stiles missing. United lined up in a 4-3-3 shape. Liverpool made 2 changes to the side we saw in episode 24. Tommy Smith picked up an injury against Vitória Setúbal, requiring an operation after part of his kneecap was sliced off in a challenge. Jeff Strong moved inside to cover for him, with Peter Wall replacing him at left back. Attacker Steve Peplow's brief time as a Liverpool first teamer was over, but he was replaced by a midfielder, as the Reds matched United's 4-3-3. In came Ian Ross, who was tasked with man-marking Bobby Charlton. With both teams setting up in 4-3-3s rather than a 4-2-4 typical at the time, the midfield was obviously a bit more crowded than usual. The match started with the ball bouncing back and forth in midfield, and before long both teams were going long, playing over the top of a busy area in the middle. The problem was that neither team was set up to play this way either. Both sides were using wingers rather than real number 9s to lead the line, with George Best up front for United and Peter Thompson for Liverpool. They would kick aerial balls up towards 2 men who really wanted it into feet, outnumbered by physically stronger defenders. Thompson was able to show off his neat feet when he got on the ball, but most of the time David Sadler and Ian Ure would head it away before it got to him. Thompson was also reluctant to attack the box, preferring to hold back outside, leaving no one to aim crosses at. Given his incredible dribbling ability, it was a real waste of his talents to leave him to fight for long balls with his back to goal. Bobby Graham took Thompson's usual spot on the left, and although he was a solid attacker, it was rare for him to beat a man, meaning he wasn't taking advantage of the extra space afforded to him compared to Thompson in the centre. Graham and Ian Callaghan did begin to switch flanks partway through the half, but that did little to address any of the actual issues they were facing. Best had a little more joy than Thompson, but not by much. He was willing to drop off the front line to collect the ball away from the defenders, or to pull wide and combine with Willie Morgan on the right. Emlyn Hughes was very conscious of his need to protect his fullback, dropping back into defence to cover behind Wall on several occasions. Doing so would leave space in midfield, yet United never exploited it. Out of possession, United would pull all 11 men back into their half to defend. This ceded some space to Liverpool, allowing the defenders to play forward. However, it ensured there was no space in the final third. There was little chance of Liverpool's attack breaking down such a mass defence, and their most dangerous chances came from long shots. Liverpool, on the other hand, was slightly more aggressive defensively, pressing United when the opportunity arose, or attempting to intercept the ball, allowing them to counter before United could pull men back into defence. Nevertheless, neither side were creating chances. The midfield was too packed to play passes through, while unsuitable attackers found themselves outnumbered by the opposing defence when they tried to go direct. The deadlock was broken after 20 minutes from a set piece. Sadler pushed up at a corner, obstructing the view of Tommy Lawrence and Ron Yates, and he ran towards the near post to meet the cross. He only got a glancing touch, however the ball carried on through and deflected into the net off of Yates for an own goal. It took Liverpool just 5 minutes to equalise though. Hughes raced forward to intercept Charlton's crossfield pass, nodding it on to Graham and running beyond him. United got men back to slow Liverpool's break, resulting in Callaghan attempting a shot from distance. However, Alex Stepney spilled the ball at the feet of Hughes to finish. At around this point, Callaghan began to tuck inside into the middle, helping to block up the midfield further. More useful was Thompson beginning to pull wide, allowing him to escape his markers and get on the ball.
1-1 at half-time, not bad against the European champions then, Ron?
Yes, I think we're doing very well indeed. I think we started a little bit apprehensive, and of course my own goal didn't do the team any good whatsoever, but we look as though we've come back after, you know, the goal. We've scored a very good goal with Emlyn. even though it was a mistake from Bobby Charlton and the goalkeeper. But we've got back into the game.
Yeah.
It was United who would retake the lead in the second half, though. The poor back pass by Hughes saw United win a corner. This time it was Yours' turn to push forward and obstruct Lawrence, standing on the goal line. Charlton's cross ran right through to the back post, with both Strong and Yates failing to get it away, so John Aston knocked it back inside, where Yor deflected it into the net. 4 minutes later, United doubled their lead. Wall intercepted a pass into attack, but ran straight into Charlton. The captain's cross deflected off of Yates, but this saw it drop directly in front of Morgan, who scrambled home the ball before Lawrence could get out to it. In need of goals, Liverpool were forced into making a change. Off came Ross, replaced by striker Roger Hunt for what would be his final appearance for Liverpool. Having lost his starting place, Hunt was linked with a move away. A fee agreed with Bolton Wanderers earlier in the week only for Hunt to reject the move, stating, "I've decided to stay at Liverpool for the time being to try to win back my place in the first team." Hunt was undisputedly a Liverpool legend, having become their record goal scorer 2 years earlier.
I was very fortunate to play alongside Roger Hunt. He was my partner up front when I played. Now, Roger Hunt had a unique talent. He had 2 great feet, could crack the ball with either foot. He was as strong as a horse. He was as willing a worker as you could get in football. He was as honest as the day was long. And he would score goals from impossible positions. And to play alongside a player like that was, for me, a treat.
St John. It's Hunt and has scored.
However, now aged 31, his time was coming to an end, and he soon took Bolton up on their offer. Hunt had little impact in his cameo, and the substitution only opened up Liverpool. Ross had kept Charlton on a tight leash, but with him gone, United's captain was now left free. He took full advantage, playing a 1-2 with Morgan to advance into the box and rifle a shot past Lawrence. To reinforce the point, he nearly added another minutes later.
We were having to push the game on, and we took chances at the back and we left a lot of holes.
Unsurprisingly, Liverpool didn't make a comeback, falling to what remains to this day their worst home defeat against United. But it was in reality quite an even game could suggest that it wasn't quite as bad a performance as the scoreline made it look, but it could also be interpreted another way. This was a match that easily could have ended 0-0 based on the balance of play, yet Liverpool somehow contrived to concede 4 goals. Liverpool remained in a respectable 3rd place, however it was clear changes were necessary. Just how necessary would soon become clear. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to support the channel. You can get updates on what I'm doing by following on Twitter and Facebook, links are in the description, but most importantly by supporting Holding Midfield on Patreon. Without financial support, I can't justify the time it goes into making these videos, so it keep the channel alive while also receiving access to premium content. Thanks for watching.
Well, Bob, it was great to watch, thanks very much.
Yes, it's great to play in too.